Alright, welcome everyone to the video on the blood vessels. So this figure shows the two circuits. The pulmonary circuit, which you can see here, would go to each lung. That takes blood to the lungs, where the blood picks up oxygen. And then you have the systemic circuit. Some of the blood's going up, some's going down. The systemic circuit is delivering blood to the rest of the body. This picture shows an artery and a vein, and you can see the artery wall is a lot thicker, and the inside diameter of the vein is a lot bigger. And here's a diagram of an artery and a vein. Arteries always carry blood away from the heart, and veins carry blood towards the heart. That's one way that's always true, and you can keep them straight that way. As you can see, arteries and veins are made up of three layers. The tunica intima is the innermost layer. It provides a smooth surface for blood flow. And in arteries, it contains the internal elastic lamina. The next layer is the tunica media, which contains smooth muscle. As you can see it here in the artery and here in the vein. It contains smooth muscle for constricting or dilating the blood vessel, and this layer is much thicker in arteries. The pressure is much higher in arteries, that's why. Then the outside layer is the tunica externa. It's the outermost layer. It's just a connective tissue sheath, and that's the same in arteries and veins. Alright, this figure is going to show us all the different types of blood vessels. First, remember, arteries always carry blood away from the heart, and they have a high pressure. That's why they have things like elastic tissue in them. Elastic arteries are the largest arteries leaving the heart, and they can withstand large pressure changes. That's because they have a thick elastic layer, and every time the heart beats, the pressure increases in them, but they're able to withstand those changes because of the elastic tissue. After the elastic arteries, next we have muscular arteries. They distribute blood to the skeletal muscles and organs. And then arterioles are the smallest arteries, and they're going to lead to the capillaries. Capillaries are the smallest blood vessels, and they are where nutrient exchange happens. Then from capillaries, the blood is going to be collected into venules. They collect blood from the capillaries and lead to the veins. And veins are going to bring blood back to the heart. And we'll talk more about veins in a minute. So there are three types of capillaries. This shows continuous capillaries and fenestrated capillaries. So let's talk first about continuous capillaries. They're the most common. They're found all throughout the body. Nutrient exchange happens by diffusion and also vesicular transport. So we can see some vesicles moving here. So only very small molecules can leave from a continuous capillary. Fenestrated capillaries have these holes or fenestrations. You can see here on the close-up. And that allows for faster exchange of water and nutrients. And nutrients as large as small proteins can leave. These are found in kidneys and in endocrine glands. And then the third type would be a sinusoid. Sinusoids have large spaces in between the cells, and they allow large proteins or even cells to leave. These are found in the liver, in the spleen, and in bone marrow. In bone marrow, where you're producing new blood cells, the blood cells have to enter through these big holes. This shows a close-up. Alright, so this figure shows us a capillary bed. Capillary beds supply nutrients to a specific tissue. Capillary beds often receive blood from more than one artery, called a collateral artery. So you can see there's two arteries coming to this. It's kind of a safety mechanism. And that way the capillary will receive blood even if one of these arteries is blocked. The entrance to the individual capillaries are guarded by what's called a precapillary sphincter, and here's a cross section of one. You can see the smooth muscle cells surrounding this little capillary. So these sphincters control the amount of blood going to the capillary. So if this tissue is doing a lot of work, they will open up. If this tissue is resting, they can close off so that blood can be sent to other places in the body where it's needed. And if this tissue doesn't need any nutrients, all of these precapillary sphincters will close up and the blood will travel through this thoroughfare channel, or it's called an arteriovenous anastomosis. Let's next talk about veins. Veins have very low pressure and they contain most of the body's blood volume. You can see 64% on average. And the movement of blood through the veins is assisted by one-way valves. So movement through the arteries is easy because there's pressure in them, but there's not much pressure in the valves, not much pressure in the veins moving things back towards the heart. So we have these valves, and that makes the process a lot easier. Instead of having to pump blood from your toe all the way up to your heart, you only have to pump blood from your toe up to this first valve, and then up to the next valve. And as this shows how as this muscle contracts, it's going to squeeze on that vein, and that's going to push the blood back towards the heart. So the valves only allow blood to go towards the heart. Also, valves are usually next to an artery, and when that artery pulses every time the heart beats, that's how you feel your pulse, that will also press on this vein and push the blood back towards the heart. And because of these valves, blood can return to the heart without using much energy. And if the blood pressure drops, blood volume drops, the veins can constrict, and that will help us maintain a normal blood pressure. Here we see resting and constricted veins. This is in response to bleeding. This figure shows us how the blood vessels can affect the resistance, which is one of the major factors leading to blood pressure, the other being the pressure from the heart. So the resistance comes from the vessel diameter. You can see here, having a bigger diameter greatly decreases the resistance. Also the vessel length, so a longer blood vessel is going to have more resistance. And another thing that adds to the resistance is the viscosity or the stickiness of blood. So on this viscosity chart, we can see here's molasses up here. And blood is not very viscous, but it is thicker than water, so that saying is true. So that adds to the pressure. And the blood flow depends on the arterial pressure and the resistance. And resistance, having things like plaques, decreases the diameter and increases the resistance. So this shows blood pressure going through. It shows blood pressure, blood velocity in the area of the vessels going through the arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins. And you can see as the blood flows into the smaller arteries, arterioles, and capillaries, the resistance increases because the size is decreasing. The diameter of these blood vessels decreases, so the resistance increases. And this is why the blood velocity decreases. Blood velocity is slowest here in the capillaries, and that's where we have the greatest area of vessels, and we also have the smallest diameter in our vessels. This is good because we want blood to flow through the capillaries slowly because that's where nutrient exchange is happening. And then we can see as the veins get larger, the blood velocity is going to increase. The mean arterial pressure is a calculated average pressure. So the pressure in your arteries is going to go up and down every time the heart beats. That's what this jump is. Every time the heart beats, it increases the pressure, and then when the heart relaxes, the pressure drops back down. So mean arterial pressure is average, calculated average pressure of the systolic, which is the maximum pressure, and the diastolic, which is the minimum pressure. The capillary hydrostatic pressure is due to blood pressure, and it drives filtration. So this is a blood vessel, and you can see the capillary hydrostatic pressure is pushing things out, but only very small molecules can actually get out. So capillary exchange involves diffusion, filtration, and reabsorption. So small molecules will diffuse across capillary walls down their concentration gradients. And we have capillary hydrostatic pressure pushing things out of the capillaries. Water and anything dissolved in it is going to be pushed out of the capillaries. And then we have the blood colloid osmotic pressure that is pulling water into the capillaries. And as we can see here at the arterial end of a capillary, the hydrostatic pressure is higher than the osmotic pressure, and that causes water and solutes to leave the capillary. In the middle of the capillary, there's no net fluid movement. And at the venule end of a capillary, now the hydrostatic pressure is lower than the osmotic pressure, and water and solutes are entering the capillary. Blood flow is regulated by autoregulation and central regulation. Autoregulation is more local, so if there's inadequate blood flow to an area, the blood vessels leading to that area will dilate to try to increase blood flow. So for example, if you start to run a race, your legs are going to need more blood, and so the blood vessels going to your legs are going to dilate to provide more blood. But sometimes you need more than this. So the endocrine and nervous systems, they'll try to increase the blood volume and blood pressure using hormones or stimulating the cardiovascular center. And that can also help change our blood pressure, increase it if needed. Alright, next we'll talk about the baroreceptor reflex. They're activated whenever blood pressure homeostasis is disturbed. Normal blood pressure is restored by changing the heart rate or by causing vasodilation or vasoconstriction of blood vessels, and usually it's a combination of changing the heart rate and changing the diameter of the blood vessels. So when blood pressure falls, as we see in this figure, blood pressure falls. The sympathetic nervous system is going to be activated. It's going to increase cardiac output and also cause vasoconstriction. The endocrine system is also going to be activated. It's going to increase blood cell formation and water reabsorption, and those two things are going to increase the blood volume. When the blood pressure rises, as we see in this figure, the heart releases something called ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide. This causes fluid loss from the blood due to different hormones, and it also causes vasodilation, which is going to reduce blood pressure and bring it back to normal. Chemoreceptor reflexes respond to changes in carbon dioxide or oxygen or pH levels in the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid. So when the carbon dioxide increases or oxygen or pH levels decrease, the respiratory rate is going to increase, and the cardiac output is going to increase. This will decrease carbon dioxide levels, increase oxygen and pH levels, and bring the blood back to homeostasis. This figure shows how cardiac output and blood distribution can be changed during exercise. So here we have rest, light exercise, and heavy exercise. So you can see the total cardiac output goes here 5,800 to 17,500. So that's it's increased at least triple. So pretty amazing what our bodies can do. Exercise is going to cause an increased blood flow to muscles and skin, and decreased blood flow to digestive and other organs. So you can see the blood flow to the skin really increases a lot. Blood flow to the stomach goes down, to kidneys goes down, and the blood flow to the skin goes up as well. That's to help cool us off. Only the blood flow to the brain remains constant no matter what you're doing. Okay, the short-term responses to blood loss include increasing cardiac output, and so here we are, we've reduced blood volume. We're going to increase cardiac output and constrict blood vessels to increase the blood pressure. The long-term response involves hormones that will increase the blood volume by either reabsorbing water or producing new blood cells. So that's going to increase our blood volume. Shock develops when our normal compensation mechanisms cannot maintain adequate cardiac output and blood pressure. Circulatory shock, as we see here, involves several positive feedback loops that decrease blood volume. So the first is damage to the heart muscle, and when you damage the heart muscle, then it's not going to work as well, so that's going to decrease cardiac output. And along with that, we'll have decreased blood flow to the tissues. That increases the PCO2 and the lactate and decreases the pH. That can lead to clotting within vessels, which then leads to decreased venous return, which further decreases the cardiac output. So that's another positive feedback loop. And then also with the increased PCO2, lactate, and decreased pH, that increases the capillary permeability, so more nutrients can leave the capillaries. So that reduces our blood volume, again reducing our cardiac output, and again it's another positive feedback loop. So progressive shock involves positive feedback loops that accelerate tissue damage and can lead to circulatory collapse and death. Alright, this figure shows the fetal circulation. The fetal circulation has some modifications to bypass the lungs because the fetus inside the uterus there, it's not getting any oxygen into the lungs, so you don't really need to send blood to the lungs for a fetus. So those modifications are the foramen ovale, which is a hole between the right and left atria, and that allows blood to go from the right atrium directly to the left atrium instead of going through here and going out to the lungs and coming back. The other modification is the ductus arteriosus, and that allows blood to travel from the pulmonary artery straight to the aorta instead of going through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, back to the heart, back through the heart, and then to the aorta. And these close off at birth, and that causes blood to flow to the lungs, and then the baby is breathing on its own. With blood vessels, I wanted to talk about a couple of heart defects. This first one is a ventricular septal defect. This happens when there's a hole between the two ventricles, and then you have the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mixing. Next one is called patent foramen ovale, where the foramen ovale doesn't close and you've got a hole between your right and left atria. The next one is patent ductus arteriosus, which I don't have a picture of. That's when the ductus arteriosus doesn't close. Then tetralogy of Fallot is when the pulmonary trunk is narrow and the interventricular septum is incomplete. And an Atrioventricular septal defects is when the atria and the ventricles are not completely separated, and that can lead to blood mixing. Next one is transposition of the great vessels. This is when the pulmonary artery is attached to the left ventricle and the aorta is attached to the right ventricle instead of the opposite. So these heart defects will cause serious problems in children, but nowadays we are much better equipped to detect these and repair them surgically. It's quite amazing what our surgeons can do.